Welcome back. We're joined by Fred Fleitz, a career intelligence professional, now the Senior Vice President at the Center for Security Policy for Programs and Policy. He is a man who has been bird-dogging this Iran deal better than just about anybody. You can find his writings about it at National Review Online, Fox News, and elsewhere. He is also, by virtue of his background, particularly knowledgeable about all these issues because of his time working these accounts at the Central Intelligence Agency for John Bolton as his chief of staff at the State Department and on the professional staff of the House Intelligence Committee. Fred Fleitz, welcome back. Good to have you as always.
Good to be here, Frank.
Well, you were one of the people who was, I think, instrumental to the effort made in the recent days by Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas and Mike Pompeo of Kansas to expose and raise serious questions about the presence, apparently, of secret side deals to the Obama deal. Talk a little bit about what was discovered at the International Atomic Energy Agency headquarters in Vienna by these two legislators and what you make of it.
Oh, thank you, Frank. I think the credit goes to Senator Cotton and Congressman Pompeo for having the wisdom to quickly go to the IAEA and get its side of the story about this Iran nuclear deal. They stumbled on to the existence of two secret agreements concerning weapons-related activity by Iran and access to a very sensitive site, the Parchin military base, where Iran has been conducting explosive warhead experiments. Apparently, these two issues are the subject of secret bilateral agreements between Iran and the IAEA that will not be released to the United States, the American people, or the U.S. Congress. This is a direct violation of the Card-and-Crooker bill, which requires all elements of the Iran deal, including all side deals, to be passed to Congress.
Well, just to be clear about this, so there are agreements that were made about two of the thorniest issues in this negotiation, namely the very, very considerable suspicion that the Iranians had been involved in nuclear weapons-related activities at this one site, Parchin, which we've been told they've gone to great lengths to conceal, and the broader array of activities that they've apparently engaged in of a military nature in this nuclear space. And the U.S. government doesn't know what was agreed? And I understand that John Kerry said as much on the Hill yesterday. Is that your understanding as well?
That's what Kerry said, and that's what Pompeo and Cotton believe. And let me tell you, this is very suspicious, because in June, Kerry tried to write off these issues in a very generous deal to the Iranians. Wasn't generous enough. Supreme Leader Khamenei wrote it off. And now, suddenly, these secret arrangements, which seem to sweep these issues under the rug, which is what Kerry wanted to do in June, suddenly are discovered, just by accident I might add, and Congress isn't allowed to see these agreements.
That's the thing, Fred. The White House, I gather initially there was sort of an effort to obscure the nature of these agreements or maybe even their existence, but the White House has now come around to saying, well, no, they exist, and we know what's in them, and we're happy to share that information with the Congress. But I gather that's not quite the same thing as actually sharing the contents or the actual texts. What do you make of that?
Well, National Security Advisor Rice gave a very morally response. We have shared all documents that we are a party to and have helped write with Congress. And then they said, well, we will brief what's in these agreements to Congress. The problem is, Frank, Congress can't know what's in the agreement, but Congress can't see the agreement.
Well, they could theoretically be told everything that's in them, but if the administration itself doesn't seem to have these documents, this seems to be kind of like the old telephone game where, there may be a lot of things slipping between cup and lip, as it were, before the Congress is advised as to what actually has been agreed to here. Again, not just on sort of ancillary matters, but matters directly relevant. And talk about that, Fred. You've spent your lifetime in the verification business and making sense of it. What does it mean if we don't actually know what is the baseline of these activities that Iran is supposed to be prevented from pursuing further?
The agreement can't be verified if we don't have a baseline on possible military dimensions, which is UN lingo for nuclear weapons work by Iran. I mean, numerous nuclear experts have said this. The reason is that we have to know what Iran has been doing and where it has been doing it. And Secretary Kerry said something in June, we're not concerned about the past in this agreement. Wrong answer. If we're going to have a meaningful agreement, and this agreement is bad for so many other reasons, I don't want to get into that, but if we're going to contend that this agreement has realistic verification provisions, this issue should have been answered before anything was agreed to. Now it seems to be swept under the rug in a secret procedure with the IAEA.
And Fred Fleitz, one other facet of this, of course, is John Kerry has also tried to dismiss the significance of this past activity by insisting, rather over the top, it seemed to be, that the United States has, I think he said, perfect knowledge of what has gone on in Iran to this point. Again, as a man who's devoted his life to assessing and understanding and helping policymakers make sense of the activities of closed societies that are very secretive about these sorts of enterprises, notably North Korea and Iran, but among others. What did you make of that statement, and what should Democratic members of the United States Congress in the House and the Senate, who will be the deciding votes in all likelihood on the legislation that is to be considered shortly, to make of A, what's happened with these side deals, B, the lack of knowledge by the United States government about what's in them, C, the perhaps illegal failure to disclose that problem, and D, this notion or assertion that actually not to worry, we've got perfect knowledge of it all anyway.
I couldn't believe my ears when Kerry said we have perfect knowledge. It's well known that in Iran and North Korea there are numerous Enigma sites, and that facilities have frequently been discovered by accident or by opposition groups. This is the opposition groups in Iran. There's a major nuclear facility for enrichment in North Korea that U.S. intelligence knew nothing about. What is Congress going to do about this? Well, I think this is a game changer. It does suggest that the administration has not complied with the corporate pardon bill. You and I have discussed how this is a terrible bill, but it does have requirements that elements of this agreement have to be provided to Congress. I suspect this is going to be seen as bad faith by a lot of fence-sitters on this Iran deal. I think there's Democrats and Republicans who are sort of thinking of supporting it, but this is going to make it much harder because they're seeing something here where important aspects of this agreement were not being shared with them on very sensitive elements of the agreement. And I just think it's going to hurt the administration's effort to sell the agreement.
Fred Fleitz, we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to ask you quickly one other issue that has arisen recently that I think was another of these sorts of concessions in the end game of the negotiations, involves an obligation on the part of the United States and others party to this deal to actually protect this Iranian nuclear program from attack. Is that correct? And what are the implications of that?
Well, my understanding is that there are provisions in the agreement under which we will help the Iranians protect their nuclear program from sabotage. That means in the future, if Iran starts using their nuclear program to make weapons, the United States and Israel and other intelligence services will have difficulty and may find it impossible to sabotage that program with, let's say, a virus like the Stuxnet virus that allegedly was used against the Iranian program several years ago. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
It is unbelievable, and all the more reason, as we've been discussing elsewhere in the program and will next with Clifford May, why this deal should be defeated. Fred Fleitz, we appreciate enormously your efforts in that regard, as well as your expertise more generally, your past service to the country at all of these important institutions, and now with the Center for Security Policy. Keep it up. Come back to us again next week. Cliff May, as promised, from the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, joins us right after this.